Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with the Center Square's Washington State Capitol correspondent, Carlene Johnson, here to talk about the CEO of a Tacoma nonprofit being placed on paid leave amid an internal investigation, partially due to your reporting, Carlene, and that of Brandy Cruz, an independent journalist from Seattle, around several nonprofits, this one potentially included, misappropriating state taxpayer funds intended for this housing program. Why don't you give us some of the background context before we dig into this new edition?
No, absolutely. So a couple of weeks ago, we did our first article, and there have been subsequent ones. Our colleague, TJ Martinell, has also written a couple of articles as we started to unpack this. This goes back to a whistleblower, a real estate managing broker by the name of Corey Orvold. And she was a volunteer with the Tacoma Urban League, but was trying to get some of her clients access to taxpayer funds through some of these race-based housing programs, the Covenant Homeownership Program, which we've written about extensively, as well as the Community Reinvestment Program. This is a program, whatever you think about these race-based programs, outside of that, there are hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars set aside for folks who, relatives of those who maybe were victims of housing discrimination policies of the past, or just from other minority groups that are kind of trying to get a leg up, whether it is a down payment for a home or investment to start a new business, maybe to pay off some student debt, that sort of a thing. So there's a lot of money set aside, and these nonprofits, the Seattle Metropolitan Urban League, the Tacoma Urban League, and many others that are getting millions of dollars from the Washington State Department of Commerce to then distribute to these minority groups in the community. So the first article that we did, and Brandy Cruz with the Undivided podcast also gained access to many of these documents from the whistleblower, Corey Orvold, showed that some of these folks that are in positions of leadership with the Seattle Urban League were giving some of these loans and some of the debt forgiveness, millions of dollars worth, to their own inner circle, including family members. And we now have the Washington Attorney General Nick Brown's office is investigating the Seattle Urban League. And that was just kind of the tip of the iceberg, which, we kind of reported on in that initial article. There's a lot more to be uncovered. And this week's, exposure of the Tacoma Urban League is the next chapter of that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the iceberg is beginning to turn over with your TJ and Brandy's coverage on this in the past week or two. But interesting to see what's happening with the Tacoma League, because in that initial coverage, like you were saying with the Seattle Urban League, there was a lot of names put out, clients, the staff that were involved in potentially misappropriating those funds. You got comments from the AG's office and all that. But that's not so much the case here with the Tacoma Urban League, at least in terms of evidence on hand. I mean, I think it's very notable that the nonprofit has placed the CEO on paid leave and is acknowledging this internal investigation. But in that same step, they're saying, look, with this other story, you had all these specifics, and those specifics aren't here. It's just a rumor. Can you expand on that a little bit more? What do they mean by it's just a rumor being thrown our way, considering everything else that's being unfolded with these other nonprofits?
So Desiree Wilkins Finch, CEO of the Tacoma Urban League, was in fact placed on paid leave last week, and then they put a statement out on the Urban League website, but they said any further inquiry, basically saying she's done great work for us. We know there's some questions out there. We've launched our own third-party investigation. They won't say whether or not the AG's office is investigating, and the AG won't tip his hand on that either. My speculation is that, in fact, the AG's office is also looking into the Tacoma Urban League, but they won't confirm nor deny that. But then they sent us to Dana Hill, PR, basically, for the Tacoma Urban League. And that you're right. Her sense was, while there might be all this evidence, named names, lots of people that there's evidence against for the Seattle Urban League, we don't have that for Tacoma Urban League. Well, the evidence is there, and some of it is already being uncovered. And we do have some additional documents that didn't have time to completely contribute for this last article, but it's there. The difference being with the Seattle Urban League issues, it was individuals, right, getting down payments for homes, getting debt forgiveness.
Family members, not just
Family
any
members.
individual, family
Right,
members of the
exactly.
people working there.
Right. And also the fact that they made a very close circle of lenders and agents that they were allowing to basically get a piece of the pie. It's like, okay, you've got somebody that might, be able to get access to these funds. You're going to have to use our lender. We're not going to use this guy here. We're going to use our realtor on this, not your realtor. And so those names and individuals are all spelled out. The difference with the Tacoma Urban League is they chose to use their $5 million that they got from Commerce this year to focus on minority business development. So rather than individuals for down payments for a house or debt forgiveness, they were doing it for, minority owned businesses. So then you had groups that were coming in, woman by the name of Noemi Kagaton Porter that I interviewed that runs a group called CJK Community Homes, and they work to put people in minority owned businesses. And they were at the very tail end of a process, having secured $1.5 million for these minority clients that were either, staying in business, maybe needed to pay off some debt, or opening a minority owned business in the Pierce County, Greater Tacoma area. She got to the end of this process where she's working with the Department of Commerce. She's working with the Tacoma Urban League. Everybody's in line. And all of a sudden she was ghosted. Very similar to what kind of happened with the Seattle Urban League and folks that thought they had secured access to funds for their clients. In this case, the same thing happened with Noemi, and the $1.5 million promised to her clients was suddenly gone. Now, where that went, who ended up getting it, that's going to be the next part that needs to be exposed. I know Brandy's been looking into this as well, and she's got another podcast coming out this week that might detail some more of that. But a lot of things to be exposed, a lot of folks that are asking, the right questions. And what was interesting is that Desiree Wilkins Finch, the CEO from Tacoma Urban League, who was placed on paid leave, she says she wasn't told why she was placed on leave, whether that's a truth or not, I don't know. She was texting me saying initially she was going to give me an interview and saying, well, tell me why I was placed on leave. And I'm responding to her saying, well, what did they tell you? Why were you placed on leave? The connection, obviously, to the bigger investigation about, these race-based programs is obviously it. And it was within a couple of days of our initial article coming out that she was placed on leave. So my guess is she knows. I don't know if her hands are clean in it or not. That'll come out in the investigation, but there's so much more here.
Yeah, really interested to see where that money ended up. And I'm sure that, probably all that money didn't go to one person or one business. But the question is, did it go to family members like in these other cases? And from the statement they gave you, it sounds like they're trying to push this and look, we're launching this investigation out of an abundance of caution. But at the same time, I know you said there's evidence that we're going to report on soon. But what we do know right now is that Corey Oldwald, the whistleblower, she worked with the Tacoma Urban League in addition to the Seattle Urban League. It's not like they're just lumped into this because they're a similar nonprofit. She was working there as well and then resigned as she started asking all these questions.
And she was just a volunteer, not a paid staff member. But for 8.5 years, Corey Orvold volunteered with the Tacoma Urban League and helped them build up some of these, sort of ground level programs. At the time, she told me when she started, They were doing things as, financial literacy for folks that maybe wanted to open a business. That's a minority member of the community. I've got this chunk of change from my grandfather that passed. I'm going to open a coffee shop. I really need some education in this. They set up those sorts of organizations to help folks get, whether it was schooling, whatever they needed to do, remedial education in some cases, so that they could have access to these funds. Because you do have to, it's an application like anything else, right? And you have to prove that you're probably going to be a good steward of those taxpayer dollars. So that's what she did with the Urban League. And she really believed, and she's half Black herself, which is not irrelevant. And the reason I say that, Tim, and I pointed this out in the article, and she told me this in the video that's linked with my article, she believes that the reason some of this stuff has not been covered by more mainstream media is because it's a sensitive racial issue. People don't want to touch it and go, wait a minute, you're saying something bad about these, about a minority program, and nobody's wanted to touch it. But now you've got members of the Black community speaking up saying, I was done wrong by my own community. And so then it becomes something that is undeniably, has to be exposed. But that is her sense in large part for why, because she's been trying to get people to pay attention to this since January of this year. And she went to Commerce, she went to the AG, she went to the state auditor's office, and nobody would pay attention to her. It wasn't until the evidence was so overwhelming and Brandy combed through the evidence and we started uncovering it as well that, people have started to pay attention. So it's good on people like her that have said, wait a minute, there might have been something really good here for community and you guys wrecked it, in her words, and it needs to be exposed. So I think that's why she's been so willing to put herself out there. It's cost her a great deal. It's costing her clients. It's costing her, she said, family members. It's, people are accusing her of being racist, even though she's a half Black woman, because she's coming out against these programs.
Well, a lot of sensitivity around these race-based programs, but I think when it really comes down to it, there's a different lens here, and that's that this is a taxpayer issue. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being doled out into this program that are supposed to be going towards this program, and I'll give it's a noble cause, but you have to make sure that it's being appropriated the correct way, and that's not what's being done. It's being doled out to family members, to people that work with these nonprofits, and they need to get a hold on it, whether that be through internal investigations, the AGO's investigations, and I'm sure we'll get more into that over the coming months, but media is a large part of that, and I will be really interested to see if some of the bigger outlets out of Seattle and Tacoma and other areas dig more into this as it reaches the light of day. But Carlene, we appreciate your coverage on this and everyone else that's contributed to it thus far.
New records that reveal the Washington State Bar Association investigation into Attorney General Nick Brown might need a little bit of a deeper dive here. Seems like there were some things that still have gone unanswered, and some indication that perhaps the Washington State Bar Association was in closer communication with the office than they may have indicated prior. So unpack this for us, TJ, because you're the only reporter who has been covering this, and I think people need to understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's what kind of baffles me is nobody else has touched this story. That nobody's been asking I don't think that a single other media outlet, even ones who are otherwise critical of Brown, have even talked about it. And so, and on top of that, you had, I've said before, I reached out to legal experts to talk to them about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. We have our theories on that. We're looking into that. So long story short, a bar complaint was filed against Brown with the Washington State Bar Association. They sent him a letter saying, you need to respond to these allegations by this date. He didn't. They sent him a follow-up letter saying, you need to do this or there's going to be consequences. He still didn't. And from what we understand internally, his executive assistant missed the email because she was on vacation. And the day after that deadline, they found out about it. And Noah Purcell, the Solicitor General, reached out to the State Bar Association, the person who is handling the investigation, And we know all of this because we get public records, but State Bar Association complaints and investigations are supposed to be private matters. They're supposed to be confidential. They're not supposed to be disclosable to the public, but because they were communicating with the Attorney General's office, that's what happened. We know this is probably the most media coverage any State Bar Association investigation will ever get in Washington State because of this. So I don't think any other one where we have this much knowledge about how the investigation actually went down. What's also interesting is the State Bar Association guy who was handling the investigation. We sent a follow-up email after his phone call with Noah Purcell and said something very interesting. He said, I've taken the liberty of appointing you the defense counsel. Let me know if I should put someone else. We're going to infer a little bit, but that infers that Noah Purcell didn't say, I'm calling on behalf of Nick Brown. He's my client. Because they're not investigating Nick Brown as the Attorney General. They're investigating him as a private attorney. And so, and also that's them appointing Noah Purcell defense counsel, not Noah Purcell saying I'm legally representing Brown in this matter. So we can only infer what was said during that phone conversation. What's also interesting is they asked for 2 extensions, and we did not know this because nobody, including the Attorney General's office, told us about this. That would have been good to know because they did after that ask for 2 extensions. And what we found is that Noah Purcell actually wasn't working on the response. That was Emma Grumberg, who is the Deputy Solicitor General. She's the one who signed this whole amicus brief that caused the bar that triggered the bar complaint that Noah Purcell did not. I mean, it's so convoluted because nowhere to be found in any of this is Nick Brown. And yet he's supposedly the heart of this investigation. He's nowhere to be found. He's not mentioned anywhere. He's not included in any of the communication. Oh, he is included in some of the communications, but just he is radio silent on this whole thing. This is, and so
it's still not responded to you ever, right? I mean, you continue to make it.
I mean, they've said that they did nothing wrong filing the amicus brief. They claim that the complaint is groundless and meritless. And they really, there's so many questions that are being begged is why did it take so long for them to form a response to this? Why, if it was not a big deal, did the State Bar Association ask for a response? And then on top of all that, right when I started to reach out about this kind of stuff is when the Bar Association was telling Noah Purcell, you might want to get this stuff to us soon. And then when I reached out to the State Bar Association last month about this whole investigation, the investigation ended hours later.
That is closed. Nothing to see here.
Right. And they also, at the same time, dismissed a complaint against Noah Purcell for representing Nick Brown. So we have an idea of what actually happened, but I just think what's so fascinating about this case is it's a bar and complaint investigation into the sitting Attorney General over stuff that he wasn't really involved in. I don't think he was really involved at all with the amicus brief that triggered this complaint. Noah Purcell was involved, but he didn't sign the amicus brief. Emma Grumberg did. Noah Purcell was was appointed by the Bar Association to represent Nick Brown in this bar complaint, but he's not the one doing all the legwork. That was Emma Grumberg. So why wasn't she appointed defense counsel on this kind of stuff? And so it's such a weird, contorted, you almost need a Venn diagram to keep track of everything, or like one of those charts, to keep track of everything that's going on here. And mind you, this is all on taxpayer dollars. So all this stuff that's been going on. And then on top of that, the only communication we do have with Nick Brown where he's communicating is when he was doing that video that we discussed last week.
Oh my goodness. And I'll remind folks who didn't see that because they might want to look that up. So he creates this video to basically mock social media posts of people calling him out.
Yeah. And this is while the bar complaint investigation is going on. And I think the thing that I would ask Nick Brown, I requested an interview with him. They said he's not available to talk. So I don't think that's ever going to change if I'm going to try and schedule one with him. But the question I would ask him is, why didn't you just find some buddy of yours who works at some small law firm hire him for a little bit of money, maybe take him out to a nice dinner and have him legally represent you. And that way, all this is entirely confidential. Like the Attorney General's office can say, we can't comment because this involves a private matter. The State Bar Association can't comment on it because it's a confidential matter, right? That we wouldn't know any of this stuff. We wouldn't know that the investigation was going on while he's doing these videos. And we also wouldn't have known that the complaint was dismissed. This, again, in the only time there's public records that the Bar Association will disclose is when disciplinary action has been taken or it moves into a public hearing, which it didn't do. So this is where I don't understand how he couldn't have just forked out a couple $1,000s, or who knows how long it would have taken to do the response. Yeah. And or at the very least, there's $1, you don't charge too much, but you like I said, you take him out to a nice dinner, you go take him on, go on a vacation, just something as a private individual where you're like, hey, I need somebody to do this and I don't want the media to know about it or to have any disclosure because this is kind of embarrassing, right?
Well, do you have a sense that though they've felt that because they've operated above the law, I mean, so they figured they could get away with it? I mean, it seems like even in this case where you've got the State Bar Association, even though they launched a complaint and there were deadlines missed repeatedly, that eventually they were just like, as soon as you pushed on them, TJ, they wiped their hands of it and said nothing to see here. So they've been able to operate this way.
But I wouldn't have even been able to reach out to the Bar Association about this because, I could have technically gone to the complainant and asked the records from him, but I didn't get those records from him. I got these records through a public records request. And so we might not have known. And also on top of that, here's the part that's important. Nick Brown could have requested, or Noah Purcell, or whoever was actually doing the work, they could have requested that the responses be restricted so that the complainant couldn't see them. They didn't ask for that exemption. They didn't ask for it to be kept confidential from the complainant. And so that's what I find very interesting. Another thing that's very interesting is Emma Grunberger is trying to look up the number of instances where Perkins Coie, this private law firm that they filed an amicus brief in support of, that had active contracts with the Attorney General's office at the time, how many times they sued the state to kind of prove like, hey, we weren't being buddies with them. They've sued us before. They did not include that information in the response. And so the question is why? What state laws was Perkins Coie suing? Did they have active contracts with the Attorney General's office at the time, which meant the Attorney General's office had to give them permission to sue the state? So what law was overturned? What regulation was overturned? It raises more questions. And again, if they had just hired outside counsel and asked that it be kept restricted, this would not be a matter of public knowledge. Or at the very least, I don't know if I could have written any kind of story of any meaningful kind because I would only have one side of it. You can go to Nick Brown and ask him. He can just say, I have no comment. This is a private matter. And nothing happened, right? They dismissed the complaint. They say it was dismissed. There's nothing to see here. And the Bar Association can't disclose the information because no disciplinary action was taken. So
now, in the time this was closed, though, the complaint basically dismissed. Is that the end of it, or is there a potential appeal at this point?
There's a potential appeal, and the thing is by making it by going about it this way, it's only giving more fodder for the complainant to say, here's all the problems with this. One, you're having the Attorney General's office legally represent a private attorney, which they're not allowed to do. He's not being invested, and the State Bar Association said, we do not investigate people in their public offices. We investigate them as private attorneys. So in this function, what complicates it is Nick Brown's was investigated for actions he took while acting as Attorney General, which really raises these questions of how the Bar Association, I guess, the level of protection that an attorney in the Attorney General's office or a private law firm acting as the Special Assistant Attorney General, they have now protection where they can do things. And if the bar complaint somebody files a bar complaint against them, the Attorney General's office can get involved and use taxpayer dollars to defend these people, even though they may have a complaint filed against them as a private attorney or for stuff they did as a private attorney. So it's just investigating all this stuff has been very enlightening as to how the legal system works and how, law firms operate and what's considered normal. Or
Well, if you don't have any degree of separation between these people and they're really all just protecting each other, then there's not going to be any transparency, which is what you've run into.
Well, I think on top of the transparency, there's this issue of a conflict of interest. And the issue is that lawyers are supposed to even avoid an appearance of a conflict of interest, right? So all they had to do with the amicus brief is just say, we have 10 active contracts with this law firm, by the way. They're special, they're SAGs. But
close that on the outset. Yeah.
And then just say, but at the same time, they've sued us this many times. So it balances itself out. But just something you should know, we're trying to act as a friend of the court. That's all they had to do. And this wouldn't have happened. There would be no basis for this complaint. So, and in their response, I looked through it. I don't think the response to the allegations acknowledged the fact that they didn't include those or disclose it. They just said, well, we have the right to file an amicus brief. Yes, you do. But if there's a conflict of interest, you have to mention that. That's part of being a lawyer. You can't legally represent people that you have a conflict of interest with. You can't get involved in things. And like I said, they have to avoid an appearance of a conflict of interest. This is, regardless, it was an appearance. You're supporting, as a friend of the court, you're supporting someone who's acting as your attorney at the time in 10 different cases and lawsuits. And so you're legally protecting your own attorney in this case. So you're not a neutral party necessarily, but that's something that the judge needs to know when they're examining the amicus brief. It's important to note that I said this before, the amicus brief did not protect Perkins Coie's federal contracts, and it didn't protect its security clearance. It protected its immediate and continuous access to those things. Because if the motion for a temporary restraining order had been denied, the amicus brief would have had no further impact on the case. Perkins Coie could have gone on, as they could, potentially, because it's being appealed, they could potentially lose all that stuff. They could lose the federal contracts and the security clearance. So this was not in support of their long-term permanent access to these things. It just protected it. What it was saying was, hey, let's put an injunction in place, a restraining order, while this case is figured out. Right? That was what the amicus brief sought to do. So the only individuals that could have benefited was the law firm Perkins Coie. So the question is, of what benefit was this to the people of Washington State?
Okay, is there a way in our last 45 seconds here for you to summarize where things stand with, because Trump got into office and immediately said, no more contracts with Perkins Coie. These guys are corrupt. We don't want nothing to do with them. Cancel all that. Get these guys out of here. And then there were some of that was put on pause by the courts. Where did that end up, or is that still
it's still under appeal? I mean,
okay.
Who knows what's going to happen with this stuff, but this could be used potentially by Trump's lawyers in as part of their appeal. I don't know if that's because another thing is that, the State Bar Association didn't think it was a big deal because they dismissed it, but the Attorney General's office communicated with Perkins Coie without consulting with the attorneys that were representing the law firm. So that's a big no-no. You're not supposed to, as an attorney, you don't consult with another attorney's client without their knowledge and consent. So that can cause them to waive attorney-client privilege. But again,
if the Trump administration needs any background information or any other reason to look deeper into some of this convoluted stuff going on, they need look no further than your coverage of this. I don't know if this was article number, I don't know, but you're right. You have been, TJ, you dogged this thing and have been the only reporter. And it's as your colleague, fellow journalist, it's kind of embarrassing that nobody else has picked up on this. So I appreciate that you haven't let it go and that you see the importance of it. And
there's more coming. So everybody's listening.
I love that. When we talk every week, that's my favorite thing. The next thing, I can't wait for it. So I encourage any of our other viewers here today or readers at thecentersquare.com/Washington. Look up TJ Martinel's articles there. Otherwise, this is Carlene Johnson along with my colleague TJ Martinel with another episode of Washington in Focus. Thanks for watching.